You think you could just walk in here and ruin my life? I own this neighborhood. That's what she said, voice shaking, mascara running, standing in the middle of my courtroom like a woman who had finally realized she'd made a mistake. She couldn't talk her way out of a mistake that started the night she decided to burn my property to the ground. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished oak and old paper. The kind of place where truth doesn't just come out, it gets pulled apart piece by piece until there's nothing left but facts. I sat there in silence, hands folded, row pressed, posture steady, watching her unravel. Her name was Evelyn Carrington, four-term HOA president, perfectly styled hair now falling out of place, designer blazer wrinkled from too many nervous movements. She had walked into this room an hour ago with the same confidence she'd carried for months, chin high, lips curled in that tight, dismissive smile, the kind reserved for people she thought were beneath her. But that version of Evelyn was gone now. In its place stood someone smaller, shrinking with every word the prosecutor read out loud. Arson in the first degree, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit property destruction. Each charge landed heavier than the last. I watched her hands tremble as she gripped the edge of the defense table, her knuckles whitening, her breathing shallow and uneven. The gallery behind her was full, neighbors, former HOA members, even a few reporters who had caught wind of the case. They whispered quietly, the low hum of disbelief hanging in the air. Because just weeks ago, Evelyn Carrington was untouchable, or at least she thought she was. She had spent years building that illusion, walking through the neighborhood in tailored suits and expensive heels, clipboard in hand like it was a badge of authority. People listened when she spoke. They complied when she issued fines. They backed down when she threatened legal action. That kind of power, unchecked, unquestioned, it does something to a person. It convinces them the rules don't apply. It convinces them they can cross lines and no one will stop them. Her attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, but she barely seemed to hear him. Her eyes kept drifting back to me, and every time they did, I saw it, that flicker of panic. Because now she knew. Now she understood exactly who she was standing in front of. Not just some quiet homeowner she had targeted. Not just the man whose property she thought she could erase with gasoline and a match, but the judge who would decide how the rest of her life unfolded. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The weight of the moment did all the talking. The prosecutor approached the bench, placing a folder down with deliberate care. Inside were photographs, reports, timelines, evidence collected piece by piece, patiently, methodically. I had seen it all before this hearing. Every detail, every mistake she made. And there were many. The fire, that was her turning point. The moment she crossed from harassment into something far more serious. She thought it would solve her problem. She thought destroying my property would erase me from the equation, force me out, clear the way for whatever scheme she was running behind the scenes. But she didn't understand something fundamental. You don't destroy a man by taking his house when that man has spent his life understanding the law. You just give him a case. The bailiff shifted near the door, the faint jingle of keys breaking the silence for a moment. Outside, I could hear the distant echo of footsteps in the courthouse hallway. Life going on, ordinary and unaware. But inside this room, everything had narrowed down to this one moment. Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice no longer sharp, just thin, brittle. This is a misunderstanding. The words hung there, fragile and hollow. No one moved. No one responded. Because everyone in that room could feel it. The truth had already taken root. And there was no pulling it back. I leaned forward slightly, just enough to meet her gaze fully this time. Calm, steady, unmoved. And in that silence, with the weight of the law pressing down around her, Evelyn Carrington realized something that most people never do until it's far too late. She hadn't just targeted the wrong property. She had targeted the wrong man. 3 months earlier, the property had still felt like a blessing. My name is Raymond Hale, 54 years old, recently returned to the one place in Colorado that still sounded like peace to me, a cedar-sided house at the edge of Juniper Ridge, tucked behind a stand of blue spruce and backed by 6 quiet acres my father left me in his will. The house wasn't flashy. It had a deep front porch, fieldstone steps worn smooth by decades of boots, and old brass fixtures that carried the faint smell of metal and lemon oil when the afternoon sun warmed them up. To most people, I probably looked like any other middle-aged man tried to start over. Denim jacket, old pickup, coffee thermos riding shotgun, the sort of face people forget 5 minutes after they've seen it. That suited me just fine. I've always believed a calm man learns more by listening than by announcing himself. I spent the first week doing what decent men do when they inherit something that matters. I cleaned gutters, repaired a warped fence panel, trimmed back chokecherry brush from the drive, and opened windows that had been shut too long. Every room carried traces of the past. Old pine, drywall dust, a little wood smoke embedded deep in the beams from winters long before mine. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a legal pad and a cup of black coffee, listening to the wind move through the trees and the distant murmur of sprinklers from the manicured homes down the hill. That was my first hint that Juniper Ridge wasn't really a neighborhood in the old-fashioned sense. It was curated, managed, combed and pressed within an inch of its life. The lawns looked measured. The mailboxes matched too perfectly. Even the parked cars seemed arranged for effect. My land predated all of it by nearly 40 years, but the development had grown up around the property lines like ivy around stone. The first time Evelyn Carrington appeared, I heard her before I saw her. The crisp, deliberate click of narrow heels on my gravel drive, each step carrying the kind of confidence that assumed it would never be challenged. She came around the side of the truck in cream slacks and a navy blazer with gold buttons, sunglasses perched high on her head despite the cloud cover. She carried a leather folder under one arm and wore a smile so polished it barely qualified as human. "Mr. Hale," she said, not as a greeting, but as an assessment. "I'm Evelyn Carrington, president of the Juniper Ridge Homeowners Association." She glanced past me toward the porch, the ladder, the coils of extension cord, the stack of salvage cedar I plan to use for repairs. "You're creating an unfortunate first impression." I looked at her for a moment, then at the house behind me. "I just got here." "Exactly," she said, as though I'd proven something. "And already the property is presenting concerns." Not asking, declaring. That was her style from the beginning. She spoke the way some people tap a pen, sharp, repetitive, meant to wear a person down by sheer insistence. She informed me that Juniper Ridge had standards. She informed me that visible construction materials disrupted neighborhood harmony. She informed me that my trailer, parked in my own drive for a single weekend, was not in keeping with the aesthetic vision of the community. Then she did something I've never forgotten. She stepped onto my porch without permission, turned slowly in a full circle, and said, almost to herself, "This parcel would be extraordinary in the right hands." The air changed after that. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough for a man paying attention. Over the next 2 weeks, small things started happening. Contractors I'd scheduled for estimates called to cancel after someone told them the title was under review. A delivery of reclaimed windows got delayed because the driver had been warned there was a legal access issue on my lane. One morning, I found bright survey ribbons tied along my fence posts where no surveyor had any right to be. Another afternoon, 2 members of the HOA Architectural Committee, retired, overdressed, and trying much too hard to appear official, stood at the edge of my property taking photos from behind a clump of juniper as if they were documenting a crime scene. I never confronted them. I simply wrote down the time, the date, the make of their car, and the license plate. The pattern sharpened by the end of the month. Evelyn wasn't improvising. She was building pressure, carefully, layer by layer, trying to make ordinary life on my own land feel expensive, inconvenient, and socially radioactive. At the grocery store, people who had waved to me the week before suddenly became interested in the produce section. At the hardware store, the cashier asked in an awkward half-whisper whether it was true I was in some kind of dispute with the association. Somebody was talking. Somebody was planting seeds. Then came the comment that told me exactly what Evelyn thought of me. She arrived just before sunset, standing at the bottom of my porch steps while the sky over the pines went copper and gray. Her perfume drifted ahead of her, too sweet, too strong, fighting with the clean smell of cut cedar. She looked at my work boots, the dust on my jeans, the calluses on my hands, and let her eyes rest there a second too long. Men in your situation, she said, almost kindly, usually discover it's easier to sell than to fight. I remember setting my hammer down very carefully after she said that. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I understood something important in that moment. Evelyn Carrington had mistaken quiet for weakness. She had looked at an old house, an unassuming man, and a piece of inherited land, and decided she was entitled to all of it. And from a way she smiled before turning back toward her Mercedes, I knew she was only getting started. By the second month, Evelyn stopped pretending this was about appearances. It became something far more deliberate, controlled, calculated pressure designed to isolate me without ever laying a hand on me directly. The first real shift came online. Juniper Ridge had one of those neighborhood groups, private, moderated, the kind where people posted lost pets and holiday decorations. But overnight it turned into something else entirely. My name started appearing in threads I hadn't even joined. Concerned homeowners asking vague questions about unverified property claims. Others chiming in with carefully worded speculation about code violations and potential legal complications. No one accused me outright, they didn't have to. The tone did the work. Doubt spreads faster than facts, especially when it's dressed up as concern. I read every post, every comment, every subtle nudge, and I noticed something most people wouldn't. Evelyn never posted directly. She didn't need to. The accounts stirring things up all traced back to the same small circle, committee members, spouses, people who owed her favors. It was coordinated, but sloppy enough that someone paying attention could map it. And I was paying attention. A week later, the county got involved. Not by accident. A white truck with code enforcement stenciled on the side rolled up just after 8 a.m., tires crunching slowly over my gravel like it had all the time in the world. The inspector, a middle-aged guy named Harris, stepped out with a tablet and a tired expression that told me he'd rather be anywhere else. Got a complaint, he said, not meeting my eyes right away. Unpermitted structural work. I nodded, walked him through everything, permits, receipts, timelines. He scrolled, checked, asked a few routine questions, and then sighed. Everything here looks fine, he admitted quietly, but I got to file a report since the complaint came in. I didn't ask who filed it. I already knew. Over the next 10 days, 3 more visits followed. Different departments, different complaints, noise disturbance, on a property where the loudest thing for miles was whined through pine. Environmental runoff, on land that had been untouched for decades. Even a zoning inquiry that questioned whether my driveway constituted improper access infrastructure. Each time, I responded the same way, calm, documented, precise. And each time, the officials left with the same expression, confusion mixed with the faint realization that they'd been used. But the damage wasn't in the citations. It was in the repetition. The message was clear, this man is a problem. Stay away. Evelyn was building a narrative brick by brick, and she was good at it. Then she escalated again. This time, she didn't hide it behind paperwork or online whispers. She made it public. The HOA called an emergency community meeting. Mandatory attendance strongly encouraged. I went, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see how far she'd push it. The community center smelled like stale coffee and industrial cleaner, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a low warning signal. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly, neighbors settling in with that uncomfortable curiosity people get when they know something unpleasant is about to happen but don't want to miss it. Evelyn stood at the front, perfectly composed, a digital presentation cued behind her. When she began speaking, her voice carried that same polished authority, but now it had an edge to it, something sharper. We are facing a situation, she said, clicking to the first slide, a photo of my property taken from an angle that made it look cluttered, chaotic. An individual who is operating outside the cooperative standards that protect all of our investments. She never said my name. She didn't have to. Every head in that room turned slowly, subtly, until they landed on me. I sat there, hands folded, expression neutral, letting her talk, letting her build her case. Because that's what she thought she was doing, building. Something solid. She outlined risks, property value decline, legal exposure, community reputation. She referenced the county visits, twisting them into something they weren't. Multiple complaints have already triggered official scrutiny, she said, pausing just long enough for the implication to sink in. We cannot ignore patterns like this. The room shifted. People nodded. Not aggressively, just enough to show they were starting to believe it. That was her real weapon. Not authority, not rules. Perception. And she was wielding it like a professional. Then came the final move. She stepped away from the podium, just a few paces, and let her voice soften, controlled, sympathetic. We all want what's best for this community, she said. And sometimes that means making difficult decisions about who belongs here. That word, belongs, hung in the air like something heavy, deliberate, calculated. I could feel it land. Around me, people shifted in their seats, some uncomfortable, others quietly agreeing. And that's when I understood the full scope of what she was doing. This wasn't about fines, or permits, or even the land itself. Not directly. Evelyn Carrington was trying to erase me socially before she ever had to do it legally. If she could turn the neighborhood against me, isolate me, make me seem like the problem, then whatever came next would feel justified. Necessary, even. I stood up when she finished speaking. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to be seen. The room went quiet, expectant, tense. Evelyn watched me closely, that small, confident smile returning to her lips. She thought I was about to defend myself. Argue, push back, prove her right. But I didn't. I just nodded once, slow and deliberate, and said, "Thank you for the clarification." That was it. No anger, no denial, no defense. Then I walked out. And behind me, I could feel it, that subtle shift in the room. Not doubt, not yet, but something close. Because people expect noise from someone being cornered. They expect resistance. What they don't expect is silence. And Evelyn, standing there at the front of that room, had no idea that silence was the most dangerous thing I could give her. The fire didn't start by accident. It started at 2:41 a.m., under a sky, so still it felt like the entire valley was holding its breath. I remember the exact time because I was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a single lamp on, paperwork spread out. In front of me, going through documents that most people in Juniper Ridge didn't even know existed. HOA financial disclosures, vendor contracts, insurance policies that didn't quite line up the way they should have. Numbers that drifted just far enough off standard to raise a flag, if you knew where to look. And I did. That's when I heard it, the low crunch of tires on gravel, slower than any delivery, too deliberate for someone lost. I didn't move right away, just listened. The engine idled for a few seconds, then cut. Silence followed, heavy, intentional. A door opened, closed. Soft footsteps, not heels this time, but careful, controlled. Whoever it was didn't want to be heard. I stood, moved to the side window, and shifted the curtain just enough to see. A dark SUV, parked halfway down the drive, lights off, and then Evelyn Carrington, moving across my property like she owned the ground beneath her feet, dressed not in her usual polished attire, but something darker, practical, something chosen for a job, not a meeting. In her hand, a red plastic container. Even from that distance, I knew exactly what it was. I didn't rush outside. I didn't shout. I didn't confront her. Instead, I stepped back into the shadows and reached under the counter, flipping a small switch mounted just beneath the lip of the wood. A soft click, barely audible. The kind of sound you only notice when you're listening for it. Cameras. Not obvious ones. Not the kind meant to deter. These were quiet, hidden, placed weeks earlier in angles that covered everything from the driveway to the porch to the tree line beyond the house. I had installed them myself after the third inspection and the fifth anonymous complaint. Because men like me, we don't react. We prepare. Evelyn moved methodically. No hesitation. No second thoughts. She approached the side of the house first, unscrewed the cap of the container, and began pouring. The liquid darkened the wood as it spread, soaking into old cedar that had stood for decades. The smell hit a second later, even through glass, sharp, chemical, unmistakable. Gasoline. She worked her way along the exterior, careful, thorough, like she was outlining something she planned to erase. Every step she took, every motion of her hand, documented. Preserved. She paused once, glancing around. Not nervously, but cautiously, like someone who believed they were smarter than the situation. Then she reached in her pocket. A lighter. Small. Silver. She flicked it once, nothing. Flicked again, flame. For a moment, just a moment, she hesitated. Not out of doubt, but calculation. And then she dropped it. The ignition wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was controlled. Almost quiet at first, a low bloom of fire catching along the line she had poured, then spreading with steady, deliberate hunger. The wood crackled, not violently, but with the slow certainty of something inevitable. I stood there, watching it happen, not panicked, not frozen, just observing. Timing. Memorizing. Because this was the point of no return. Not for me. For her. Evelyn Carrington had just crossed from manipulation into felony. From harassment into arson. And she did it on camera. She didn't run immediately. That's the part most people wouldn't believe. She stood there for a few seconds longer than she should have, watching her work take hold, watching the flames begin to climb, her face lit by the orange glow like some twisted confirmation of victory. That was her mistake. Not the fire itself, but the certainty behind it. The belief that she was untouchable. That whatever she was trying to protect, whatever financial rot was buried inside that HOA's books, was worth this. Worth destroying a man's home to keep it hidden. Eventually, she turned, walked back to the SUV, and drove off without headlights, disappearing down the road like she had never been there. I waited exactly 30 seconds after her taillights vanished before I picked up my phone and dialed. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, precise, measured. Fire reported at 118 Juniper Ridge, I said. Structure involved. I gave them everything they needed, location, access points, waterline details, information that would save time when they arrived. Then I hung up and stepped outside. The heat had already begun to push outward, the air shifting, carrying that unmistakable scent of burning wood into the night. I didn't try to stop it. That would come later, through insurance, through reconstruction, through process. What mattered now was evidence. And I had it. Every second, every movement, every decision she made that led to this moment. As the first distant sirens began to echo through the valley, I stood there in the glow of my burning property, hands at my sides, expression unchanged. Because what Evelyn Carrington didn't understand was that she hadn't just destroyed my house. She had just built my case. The morning after the fire, Juniper Ridge woke up to a story Evelyn had already written. By 8 a.m., the neighborhood forum was flooded. Concerned posts, carefully phrased sympathy, and subtle insinuations about ongoing disputes that might have led to unfortunate consequences. She didn't accuse me directly. She didn't have to. The narrative was already in motion. Unstable property owner, ongoing violations, escalating tensions, and then, suddenly, a fire. Convenient. Predictable. Almost inevitable, if you listen to the way they framed it. I read every word from the temporary rental I had arranged before sunrise. Not because I needed to defend myself, but because I needed to understand how far she was willing to go. The answer came quickly. By noon, an insurance adjuster contacted me. Not from my policy, but from the HOA's master liability carrier. That was unusual. HOA policies don't typically involve themselves in individual property fires unless there's shared liability or someone has already made a claim. That was my first confirmation. Evelyn hadn't just burned my property. She had already positioned the HOA to benefit from it. That afternoon, I made 2 calls. The first was to a man named Victor Lang, 62, former federal prosecutor, now specializing in complex financial litigation. The kind of attorney who didn't advertise, didn't chase clients, and didn't lose cases involving fraud. The second call was quieter, more deliberate. I reached out through a contact I hadn't used in years, someone in federal financial enforcement who owed me a favor I had never collected. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I just said one sentence. I believe there's an active embezzlement and insurance fraud operation running through an HOA in Colorado. That was enough. Victor met me the next morning. His office smelled like old leather and precision. Everything in its place, nothing wasted. I laid out what I had so far. The footage, the complaints, the insurance contact. He didn't react immediately. Just listened, fingers steepled, eyes sharp. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and said, "You're not dealing with a petty tyrant. You're dealing with someone who thinks they've structured this well." Then he started pulling threads. HOA financial records, vendor contracts, insurance filings. And that's when the picture sharpened into something far more dangerous than I had anticipated. The HOA had been collecting special assessment funds for infrastructure improvements, road maintenance, drainage upgrades, community enhancements. Over $2.3 million in the last 18 months alone. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Contracts were signed. Payments were logged. Work orders were documented. But when Victor cross-referenced the vendors, the structure collapsed. 3 primary contractors, different names, different addresses, but all tied back to a single holding company registered out of state. And that company? Owned by a trust with one controlling beneficiary, Evelyn Karen. It was clean on the surface, layered just enough to avoid casual scrutiny. But legally, it was a disaster waiting to be exposed. Self-dealing, undisclosed conflicts of interest, fraudulent billing. The HOA wasn't just mismanaging funds. It was being used as a pipeline to move money directly into accounts she controlled. And the fire? That added another layer. Insurance fraud. If she could position my property as part of a broader community risk issue, she could justify claims, shift liabilities, and potentially trigger payouts that fed back into the same system. It wasn't just reckless. It was strategic, and it was federal. Victor didn't smile when he explained it. He didn't need to. "This crosses into wire fraud," he said calmly. "Mail fraud. Potential RICO exposure if we tie the pattern together." He paused, tapping one document lightly. "And your video?" I nodded once. "That turns this from a financial case into a criminal one with leverage." That was the moment everything aligned. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just clearly. Evelyn Karen hadn't burned my property out of anger. She had done it to protect a system, a structure she believed was airtight, a system built on intimidation, manipulation, and money. And now, she had given us the one thing people like her never planned for: direct evidence. That evening, Victor and I prepared the first formal filings. Not public yet, not confrontational, strategic. We requested full financial disclosures under state law, documents the HOA was legally obligated to provide. At the same time, my federal contact initiated a quiet review. No announcements, no headlines, just eyes on the numbers. And then we waited, because cases like this aren't won by rushing. They're won by letting the other side believe they're still in control. Evelyn continued exactly as expected. Public statements, carefully managed appearances, even a community email expressing deep concern over the fire and a commitment to protecting neighborhood stability. It would have been impressive if it wasn't so transparent. But beneath that confidence, beneath that polished control, the structure was already cracking. She just didn't know it yet. And the deeper we looked, the more it became clear this wasn't just about one house, one fire, or one corrupt HOA president. This was a system designed to exploit trust, to move money quietly, and to silence anyone who got in the way. She thought she had erased me. What she had actually done was expose everything. By the 3rd week after the fire, Evelyn Karen decided it was time to finish what she started. Not quietly, not subtly, publicly, permanently. The notice arrived by courier, thick paper, embossed header, the kind designed to intimidate before a single word is read. Emergency property action hearing, scheduled for 9 a.m. at the community center. The stated purpose was almost laughable in its precision: to address hazardous conditions, abandonment concerns, and community risk mitigation following structural destruction. Translation: she was moving to seize control of my land under the guise of safety. Victor read it once, then set it down with a small, almost amused exhale. She's accelerating, he said. That means she thinks she's still ahead. I didn't respond right away. I was looking at the timing, the language, the coordination, because this wasn't panic, it was strategy. If she could declare the property unsafe, abandoned, and non-compliant, the HOA could step in, temporarily, of course, to stabilize the situation. Temporary control becomes long-term management. Management becomes transfer. I had seen this play before, just not this brazen. The morning of the hearing, the air carried that dry, crisp bite that comes before a Colorado winter settles in. I drove up slowly, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as the same building from weeks before came into view. Only now, it wasn't curiosity in the parking lot. It was anticipation. People gathered in small clusters, voices low, eyes sharp. Word had spread. Evelyn had made sure of it. When I stepped inside, the room was already arranged, chairs facing forward, a long table set at the front where the board sat like a panel of decision-makers. Evelyn stood at the center, dressed in charcoal gray this time, sharper, more severe. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked satisfied. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "I wasn't sure you'd attend." "I'm here," I replied simply, taking a seat without asking permission. The proceedings began immediately. No plaisanteries. No pretense of neutrality. She laid it out with practiced efficiency. Photos of the burned structure, selectively framed to emphasize instability, reports she had compiled suggesting environmental hazards, and statements, anonymous, of course, about concerns for community safety. Every piece was curated, controlled, designed to push a single narrative. This property is a liability, and the owner is incapable of managing it. Then came the motion. "Given the circumstances," Evelyn said, hands resting lightly on the table as she leaned forward, "the HOA will initiate emergency intervention protocols. This includes temporary seizure of the property for remediation, cost recovery through lien placement, and, if necessary, forced sale to protect the integrity of Juniper Ridge." There it was. Not hidden, not softened. She was taking it, in front of everyone, and she believed she had the authority to do it. The room was quiet. Not shocked, just expectant, waiting to see how I would respond. I stood slowly. No ruse, no tensión, just deliberate movement. Every eye followed. Evelyn watched me closely, that faint smile returning, the one she wore when she thought she had already won. "Mrs. Carrington," I said, voice even, measured, carrying without effort. "Before you proceed any further," I paused, not for effect, but for clarity. "Are you absolutely certain you want to take this action?" The question hung there. Simple, direct, final. For a fraction of a second, just a fraction, something flickered in her expression. Not doubt, but calculation. The kind that comes when someone realizes there might be a variable they haven't accounted for. And then it vanished, replaced by that same polished arrogance she had worn from the beginning. She let out a soft, dismissive laugh, shaking her head slightly as if the answer was obvious. "Mr. Hale," she said, her tone shifting, sharper now, edged with open contempt, "you lost the moment your house burned down. You're standing here asking questions like you still have leverage." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the room. Nervous, uncertain, but enough to reinforce her position. She straightened, looking around as if addressing the entire community. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a correction." Then her eyes locked back onto mine, colder now, stripped of any pretense. "You don't belong here," she said plainly. "And after today, you won't be a problem anymore." There it was. Not just arrogance, certainty. The kind that blinds. The kind that convinces a person they're untouchable. She turned slightly, nodding toward the board. "Proceed with the vote." Paper shifted. Pens lifted. The mechanism moved forward, exactly as she intended. And in that moment, as she dismissed the final opportunity to stop, everything locked into place. Because what Evelyn Carrington didn't understand, what she had never understood, was that power doesn't come from who speaks the loudest in a room like this. It comes from who controls what happens next. And she just made sure there was no going back. The vote never finished. It didn't get the chance to. Right as the first board member lowered his pen to sign, the doors at the back of the room opened. Not forcefully, not dramatically, just enough to shift the air. Conversations stopped mid-breath. Chairs creaked as people turned. 3 individuals stepped inside, 2 in dark suits, 1 in a uniform that carried authority without needing to announce it. No one from Juniper Ridge moved like that. No one in that room had that kind of presence. Evelyn noticed immediately. Of course she did. People like her are always aware of power. They just assume it belongs to them. "Excuse me," she said sharply, irritation flashing across her face as the interruption broke her rhythm. "This is a private HOA proceeding." The man in front didn't respond to her tone. He simply walked forward, calm, measured, until he reached the center aisle. Then he stopped. "Evelyn Carrington?" he asked, voice steady, neutral. Not a question, a confirmation. Her posture shifted just slightly, enough for someone paying attention to notice. "Yes," she replied, chin lifting again, try to reclaim control. "And you are." He reached into his jacket and produced identification, held it up just long enough for the board, the room, and her to see. "Federal." The word didn't need to be spoken. It landed anyway. You could feel it ripple through the space, quiet but unmistakable. Evelyn's expression didn't collapse immediately. That's the thing about arrogance. It resists reality for as long as it can. She gave a short, dismissive laugh, glancing briefly toward the board as if this were some misunderstanding she could smooth over. "If this is about the fire," she said, voice tightening just a fraction, "we've already initiated internal." "It is," he interrupted calmly. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. And that's when it began to unravel. Another man stepped forward, this one carrying a slim case. He placed it on the front table, opened it, and turned the screen outward. A few clicks. No build-up, no theatrics, just evidence. The video started playing. Grainy at first, night footage, low light, but clear enough. A vehicle, a figure stepping out, movement across a familiar property line. And then pouring, walking, igniting. Every angle, every step, every second, documented. The room didn't react loudly. It didn't need to. The silence that settled over it was heavier than any outburst. People leaned forward without realizing it. Someone in the back exhaled slowly, like they had been holding their breath for minutes. Evelyn didn't speak. Not at first. Her eyes were locked on the screen, her face losing color in stages, subtle, then undeniable. The smile was gone, completely, replaced by something else. Recognition, not of guilt, but of consequence. "This footage," the agent continued, voice steady, "has been authenticated and time-stamped. It places you at the scene of an intentional structural fire." He paused, not for effect, but because what came next didn't need embellishment. "Additionally, we have obtained financial records linking HOA funds to shell contractors under your control, as well as insurance communications initiated prior to the incident." That landed harder than the video, because it connected everything. Not just the act, but the reason behind it. The structure she thought was hidden, exposed. Completely. One of the board members shifted in his chair, looking from the screen to Evelyn like he was seeing her for the first time. Another leaned back, distancing himself physically, instinctively. The room was changing around her, and for the first time, she had no control over it. She opened her mouth, tried to speak, something about misunderstanding, about context, but the words didn't form the way they used to. They came out thinner, slower, unconvincing. "You don't understand," she started. "We do," the agent replied, cutting cleanly through it. "No anger, no emotion, just certainty." And then, finally, her eyes moved. Not to the agents, not to the board, to me. That's when it happened. The realization. Not gradual, not partial, complete. Because in that moment, everything aligned for her. The fire, the silence, the lack of resistance. The question I'd asked just minutes earlier. And behind it all me, not reacting, Not fighting, just watching, waiting, the same way I had watched that night from behind the glass. Her face didn't just pale, it tightened like something inside her had dropped out from under her. The confidence she had, worn for months gone, replaced by something far more honest. Fear, real, unfiltered fear, because now she understood exactly who she had been dealing with this entire time. Not just a homeowner, not just an obstacle, but the man sitting quietly in that room, who had already built the case that would decide her future. The agent closed the case with a soft click. "Evelyn Carrington," he said, stepping forward, "you are being detained pending formal charges related to arson, wire fraud, and financial conspiracy." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled. Bail maintenant. Unavoidable. And as two officers moved into position, the room remained completely still, watching the exact moment power shifted and the illusion she had built finally collapsed. They didn't drag her out. That would have been too dramatic, too theatrical for what was actually happening. Instead, it unfolded with the kind of quiet precision that real authority carries. One officer stepped to her left, another to her right, and in a motion so practiced it barely registered, her wrists were guided behind her back. The metallic click of the cuffs wasn't loud, but it was final. You could feel it settle into the room like a verdict already delivered. Evelyn Carrington, who had spent months dictating rules, issuing penalties, deciding who belonged and who didn't, stood there immobilized, her carefully curated image collapsing piece by piece. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice tighter now, stripped of that polished control. "There's been a mistake. I can explain, you'll have that opportunity," one of the agents replied evenly. Not dismissive, not aggressive, just indifferent to her status, her tone, her entire performance. Because in that moment, none of it mattered. Around her, the room shifted in ways she couldn't control anymore. People who had once nodded along with her decisions now avoided eye contact. A few stood quietly, stepping back, creating distance, as if proximity itself had become a liability. The same board members who had been ready to sign off on seizing my property just minutes earlier now sat frozen, their pens resting uselessly on the table. One of them, an older man who had seconded nearly every motion she'd ever proposed, slowly removed his glasses and stared down at the documents in front of him like they had suddenly become evidence instead of authority. And in a way, they had. The agent who had presented the footage turned his attention to the board. "Effective immediately," he said, voice carrying across the room. "All HOA financial accounts associated with Juniper Ridge are subject to federal review. Any attempt to alter, transfer, or conceal records will be considered obstruction." That landed harder than anything else, because it wasn't just Evelyn anymore. It was the system she had built and everyone who had participated in it, knowingly or not. Phones came out, quietly, discreetly. People checking balances, messages, emails, realizing piece by piece that whatever stability they thought they had was now under scrutiny. Evelyn heard it too. You could see in her face the shift from personal panic to something broader. The understanding that this wasn't a situation she could isolate, manage, or contain. "You're overreaching," she said, her voice rising now, the last fragments of arrogance pushing through the cracks. "This is a community association. You don't have jurisdiction over wire transfers across state lines," the agent interrupted calmly. "Shell entities, fraudulent billing structures. That's federal jurisdiction." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words themselves carried enough weight. Evelyn's mouth opened again, but nothing came out this time. No divated, no dismissed, just silence. Because for the first time since she had stepped onto my property weeks ago, she had nothing left to stand on. As they began to guide her toward the exit, she turned once more, eyes scanning the room, searching for something. Support, recognition, control. She found none of it. What she found instead was distance. The same people she had ruled over now watched her with a kind of detached clarity, as if seeing the truth for the first time and wanting no part of it. And then her gaze landed on me. It held there longer this time, not defiant, not dismissive, just searching, trying to reconcile the man she thought, I was with the reality unfolding in front of her. I didn't move, didn't speak, just met her eyes with the same steady calm I had carried from the beginning. Because there was nothing left to say, the law was already doing that for me. Outside, the late morning light cut sharply across the parking lot as the doors opened. The air was colder now, the kind that clears everything out, leaves no room for illusion. They walked her down the steps, past the line of cars, past the small clusters of neighbors who had followed. The scene outside, but kept their distance. No shouting, no spectacle, just quiet, undeniable consequence. A black federal vehicle waited at the curb. The door opened. She hesitated, just for a second, like some part of her still expected this to stop, to reverse, to correct itself. It didn't. She was guided inside. The door closed. And just like that, it was done. But the consequences didn't stop there. By the end of the week, formal charges were filed. Arson, wire fraud, conspiracy, financial manipulation under federal statutes that carried penalties measured not in fines, but in years. Her personal accounts were frozen. Properties linked to her holding structures flagged and seized pending investigation. The trust she had hidden behind, unraveled, exposed, and dismantled piece by piece. Even her home, the one she had once used as a symbol of status within Juniper Ridge, was no longer secure. Liens, reviews, legal holds. The system she had manipulated so confidently had turned inward, and it wasn't something she could control anymore. The HOA itself didn't survive the week intact. Emergency board resignations, legal counsel scrambling, residents demanding transparency that no one could provide. What had once been presented as a model community dissolved into audits, filings, and quiet panic as the full scope of the fraud became impossible to ignore. And through it all, there was no negotiation, no shortcuts, no influence, just process, cold, structured, and absolute. Because this wasn't her world anymore. This was mine. The rebuild didn't begin with contractors. It began with silence. The kind that settles in after everything loud, arrogant, and artificial has been stripped away. Juniper Ridge, for the first time in years, felt unguarded. No curated announcements. No polished emails dictating what color a mailbox should be or how high a hedge could grow. Just wind moving through the trees, the low hum of everyday life returning to something honest. My property sat quiet for a few weeks after the investigation stabilized. Charred beams cleared, debris documented, the land breathing again beneath open sky. I walked it every morning, boots pressing into soil that still carried the faint scent of smoke, not as a reminder of loss, but as a marker of what had been uncovered. There's a difference. Loss takes something from you. Truth gives something back. Victor handled the legal aftermath with the same precision he always did. Claims filed, restitution structured, assets recovered through channels most people never. See, insurance didn't argue. They didn't delay. Not with federal findings attached. The process moved cleanly, efficiently, almost quietly. And when the funds came through, I made a decision that surprised a few people, but not the ones who understood how this all started. I didn't rebuild the house the way it was. I rebuilt the land the way it should have always been treated. The structure that rose over the next few months wasn't larger. It wasn't grander. It was deliberate. Cedar again, because some things deserve continuity, but reinforced, grounded, built with intention instead of appearance. Wide porch, open sight lines, no unnecessary barriers. A place meant to exist, not impress. But that wasn't the part that changed Juniper Ridge. The real shift came from what I did next. The HOA, as an entity, didn't survive its own exposure. Federal oversight dissolved its authority within weeks, and what replaced it wasn't another board, another president, or another system designed to control people from the top down. It became something simpler, a cooperative agreement, voluntary, transparent, limited in scope. No fees, no arbitrary enforcement, just shared maintenance responsibilities and open records anyone could access at any time. I helped structure it, not as the man who had been targeted, but as someone who understood exactly how systems fail when they're built without accountability. We brought in independent oversight, Not flashy, not expensive, just honest. Rotating leadership, documented decisions, no closed-door sessions. And most importantly, no one person ever held the kind of unchecked influence Evelyn once wielded. People were hesitant at first. That's natural. When control disappears, it leaves a vacuum, and not everyone knows what to do with that kind of space. But over time, something shifted. Conversations replaced complaints. Neighbors started talking to each other again, not through forums or notices, but across driveways, over fences, in the kind of quiet exchanges that don't need documentation to matter. The tension that had once defined the place dissolved into something steadier, something real. I kept my distance from most of it, not out of disinterest, but because this was never about stepping into power. It was about removing the kind that shouldn't have existed in the first place. My role ended where it needed to. Quietly. Completely. On a late afternoon, months after everything settled, I stood on the porch of the new house, watching the light move across the trees in that same slow rhythm. I remembered from when I first arrived. The air carried that familiar scent, pine, earth, a trace of cedar warming in the sun. No tensión. No pressure. Just space. A couple of neighbors passed by on the road, not stopping, not staring, just offering a small nod as they went. Respect, not curiosity. That's how you know things have changed. The land was still mine. Legally, absolutely. That had never been in question. But now, it felt like it belonged in the way it was always meant to. Not controlled, not contested, just held, protected. There's a certain clarity that comes from watching someone destroy themselves, trying to take what was never theirs. It strips away the illusion that power comes from position, from titles, from the ability to intimidate others into silence. It doesn't. Real power is quieter than that. It's patient. It's precise. And when it moves, it doesn't need to announce itself. Evelyn Carrington learned that too late. Not through argument, not through negotiation, but through consequence. And Juniper Ridge learned something else entirely. That communities don't need rulers. They need boundaries. Clear ones. Lawful ones. The kind that protect what matters without trying to own it. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the property, I took a slow breath and stepped back inside. No ruse. No urgency. Just the steady rhythm of a place finally returned to itself. And for the first time since I had arrived, everything was exactly where it should be. There is something quietly unsettling about the way Evelyn Carrington lost everything, not in a dramatic explosion of chaos, but in a series of precise, inevitable consequences that she never believed would apply to her. What makes this story stand out is not just the crime itself, but the mindset behind it. She did not act out of desperation. She acted out of certainty. Certainty that titles could replace truth, that influence could override ownership, and that a system designed to serve a community could be twisted into something that served only her. But what she failed to understand is that a home is not just a structure, and land is not just an asset. They carry history, rights, and a kind of quiet authority that cannot be erased by paperwork or intimidation. Raymond did not fight her with noise or spectacle. He let the law speak, and in doing so, he revealed something far more powerful than control: accountability. And accountability, when it finally arrives, does not negotiate. It does not bend. It simply restores balance. That is what truly defines a community, not rules imposed from above, but respect that is earned and protected by something deeper than fear. So here's a question for you. Would you have stayed as calm and patient as Raymond if someone tried to take your property, or would you have confronted them much earlier? I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.